The rain hammered against the cafe windows as Talia wiped down tables, her movements automatic after 8 months of the same routine. The small neighborhood restaurant buzzed with its usual morning chaos, construction workers grabbing quick breakfasts, office employees rushing through their coffee orders, the familiar symphony of a working-class district coming alive. Then he walked in, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with an aura of controlled danger that made conversations pause mid-sentence. His dark hair was perfectly styled in a mid-fade, parted in the middle and swept smoothly to both sides. A dragon tattoo peeked from his collar, its intricate lines disappearing beneath the expensive fabric. He ordered coffee. Black, simple. But when Talia returned with his order, she watched him pat his jacket pockets, a slight frown creasing his angular features. "I left my wallet in the car," he said, his voice low and controlled, carrying an accent that spoke of Seoul's elite districts. Without hesitation, Talia placed her hand gently over the cup's saucer. "It's on me." The man's eyes, sharp, calculating, dangerous, met hers. For a moment that stretched like eternity, he studied her with an intensity that should have made her step back. Instead, Talia held his gaze, her brown eyes steady and warm. He stood slowly, adjusting his suit jacket with practiced precision. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority, he said 2 words that would change everything. "Follow me." Welcome to Korean Mafia lovers. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. Talia's world had never been easy. Growing up in foster care, working her way through community college while juggling 3 part-time jobs, she'd learned that survival meant being smart, being kind, and never expecting handouts. The Sunrise Cafe wasn't glamorous: cracked vinyl booths, a temperamental coffee machine, and a manager who counted every sugar packet. But it was honest work, and Talia took pride in treating every customer with dignity. She'd noticed the man the moment he entered, not because of his obvious wealth or striking appearance, but because of the way he moved, like someone accustomed to having his presence acknowledged without demanding it. The other customers had instinctively given him space, though they probably couldn't explain why. Now, standing beside his table with her heart hammering against her ribs, Talia wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "I'm working," she managed, gesturing toward the other tables that needed attention. He placed a black business card on the table. The material felt expensive between her fingers, embossed with Korean characters she couldn't read and a phone number. When she looked up questioningly, he was already walking toward the door. "The manager won't mind," he said without looking back. Talia glanced toward the kitchen where Mr. Chen was frantically waving her toward the exit. His face had gone pale after seeing the card, and his hands shook as he made shooing motions. "Go, go," he whispered urgently. "Don't keep him waiting." The cold Seoul air hit her face as she stepped outside, her thin uniform jacket inadequate against the October wind. The man, she still didn't know his name, stood beside a black SUV with tinted windows. The vehicle looked armored, she realized with growing unease. "If I wanted to harm you," he said, reading her hesitation, "I wouldn't have asked politely." There was something brutally honest in his tone that made her believe him. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Talia approached the vehicle. The interior was luxurious beyond anything she'd experienced. Leather seats that probably cost more than her yearly salary, climate control that immediately warmed her chilled skin, and a partition separating them from the driver she couldn't see. "Where are we going?" she asked as the SUV pulled smoothly into traffic. "Somewhere we can talk properly." He studied her profile as she watched the familiar streets of her neighborhood give way to gleaming high-rises. "What's your name?" "Talia." She turned to face him fully. "And you are?" "Ryujin." The name rolled off his tongue like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "And you just did something very few people would do?" "Bought a stranger coffee?" Talia's laugh held a nervous edge. "That's not exactly revolutionary. In my world it is." The cafe he brought her to existed in a different universe from the Sunrise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Gangnam district, where glass towers pierced the sky like crystal spears. The clientele spoke in hushed tones over artisanal pastries that cost more than Talia's daily wage. Ryujin ordered for both of them, coffee for him, a latte with intricate foam art for her. When she protested that she couldn't afford it, he silenced her with a look. "You paid for mine," he said simply. "Allow me to return the courtesy." They sat in a corner booth, the city sprawling beneath them like a circuit board of light and ambition. Talia felt acutely aware of her uniform, her scuffed shoes, the way other patrons' eyes lingered on their unlikely pairing. "Why did you do it?" Ryujin asked, his fingers wrapped around his cup with surprising delicacy for hands that looked capable of violence. "Do what?" "Pay for a stranger's coffee when you clearly count every dollar." Heat rose in Talia's cheeks. "How do you know Your shoes are resoled. Your uniform is clean but faded from multiple washings. You calculated the tip in your head before deciding you could afford to cover my order." His observation wasn't cruel, merely factual. "So why?" Talia stared into her latte, watching the foam art slowly dissolve. "My grandmother used to say that kindness is the only thing that multiplies when you give it away. Maybe that's naive, but," she shrugged, "it's how I was raised." Something shifted in Ryujin's expression, a crack in the armor she was beginning to recognize as his default state. "Your grandmother sounds wise." "She was." Talia's voice softened. "She passed when I was 16. Foster care after that. No family. Just me." She met his gaze directly. "What about you? Family business, I'm guessing, based on—" She gestured vaguely at his expensive everything. A shadow passed over his features. "Something like that." The conversation continued for an hour, dancing around deeper truths while establishing an unexpected rhythm. Ryujin asked careful questions about her life, her dreams of finishing her business degree, her plans to eventually open her own restaurant. In return, he offered carefully curated glimpses of his world, business dealings he couldn't discuss in detail, the weight of inherited responsibilities, the isolation that came with his position. When he finally drove her back to the Sunrise Cafe, Talia felt as though she'd been holding her breath for hours. "Thank you," she said, her hand on the door handle, "for the coffee, and for whatever this was." Talia. Her name sounded different in his accent, each syllable deliberate. "Be careful walking home tonight." It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, and as she watched his SUV disappear into traffic, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that her simple act of kindness had set something irreversible in motion. The next 3 days passed in a strange haze of hyper-awareness. Talia found herself scanning the cafe for Ryujin's distinctive silhouette, jumping every time the bell above the door chimed. She told herself it was anxiety, not disappointment, when he didn't appear. Then, on Thursday evening, she saw him, not in the cafe, but across the street as she waited for the bus. He sat in a different vehicle this time, a sleek sedan with darkened windows, and made no attempt to hide his presence. When their eyes met through the rain-streaked glass, he simply nodded once before driving away. Friday brought another sighting. Ryujin, emerging from a black coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment building. He didn't approach, didn't wave, just acknowledged her with that same measured nod before disappearing around a corner. By Saturday, Talia had had enough. She found him at the upscale cafe where he'd taken her, sitting in the same corner booth with a newspaper and an untouched cup of coffee. This time she didn't wait for an invitation. "Are you following me?" she demanded, sliding into the seat across from him. Ryujin folded his newspaper with methodical precision. "Are you uncomfortable?" "I'm confused." Talia leaned forward, her voice low but intense. 3 days, 3 different locations. Either you're stalking me or you're protecting me. Which is it? Does the distinction matter? To me? Yes. She crossed her arms. I don't like being watched, and I don't like games. So whatever this is, just say it. For the first time since she'd met him, Ryujin smiled, not the polite expression he'd worn during their previous encounter, but something genuine that transformed his entire face. "You're direct," he observed. "I appreciate that." "And you're evasive. I don't appreciate that." His laugh was low, rich, and entirely unexpected. "Fair enough." He gestured to the server, who appeared instantly with a latte for Talia. I've been ensuring your safety. From what? From the consequences of being seen with me. The simple statement carried implications that made Talia's stomach tighten. What kind of consequences? Ryujin was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently against the table. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the bustling cafe fade into background noise. My business involves complicated relationships, people who might view your kindness toward me as something more significant than it was. What kind of business? The kind where showing weakness can be fatal. Talia studied his face, noting the careful way he chose his words, the tension that never quite left his shoulders. And buying you coffee made me a weakness? No. His eyes met hers with startling intensity. It made you important. The admission hung between them like a live wire. Talia felt her pulse quicken, not from fear but from something more dangerous, recognition. She saw it in the way his carefully controlled expression faltered, in the way his breath caught almost imperceptibly when she leaned closer. Important how? I don't know yet. The honesty in his voice was almost painful. That's what concerns me. They talked until the cafe began preparing for its evening closure, the conversation weaving between careful revelations and comfortable silences. Ryujin spoke about the pressure of inherited expectations, the isolation of command, the way trust became a luxury he couldn't afford. Talia shared her dreams of culinary school, her determination to build something meaningful from nothing, her refusal to let circumstances define her possibilities. When he drove her home this time, Ryujin didn't simply drop her off. He parked and walked her to her building's entrance, his presence both protective and proprietary in a way that should have alarmed her. Talia, he said as she reached for her keys, if anything unusual happens, anyone asking questions about you, strangers in your neighborhood, anything that feels wrong, call me immediately. He pressed a different card into her palm, this one with only a phone number embossed in silver. Promise me. The urgency in his voice made her nod before she could think to question it. I promise. As she climbed the stairs to her small apartment, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a precipice. Behind her lay the safe, predictable world she'd built through sheer determination. Ahead lay something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She was beginning to understand that Ryujin wasn't just wealthy or powerful, he was dangerous. And despite every rational thought screaming at her to run, she was drawn to him like a moth to flame. The question was whether she'd survive the burn. The envelope changed everything. Talia found it on Tuesday morning, wedged behind the dumpster in the alley behind the Sunrise Cafe. She'd been taking out trash when she noticed the manila package, slightly damp from the previous night's rain, but otherwise pristine. No address, no postmark, just a series of Korean characters written in red ink across the front. Her first instinct was to throw it away with the rest of the garbage. Her second was curiosity, a trait that had gotten her into trouble more than once. Inside were photographs, black and white surveillance shots of Ryujin entering and leaving various buildings, timestamps indicating they'd been taken over the past month, maps of the city with locations marked in red, documents in Korean with what looked like financial information, and at the bottom, a single photograph that made her blood run cold. It was her, walking out of the upscale cafe with Ryujin 3 days ago, his hand resting protectively on her lower back as he guided her toward his car. Someone had been watching them. Someone who took the time to document their meetings, to map Ryujin's movements, to identify her as a person of interest. Talia's hands shook as she stuffed the contents back into the envelope. She should call the police. She should throw it away. She should pretend she'd never seen it. Instead, she called Ryujin. He answered on the first ring. Talia. I found something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think someone's been watching us. The silence that followed stretched so long she wondered if the call had dropped. Where are you? His voice had gone cold, professional. The cafe, in the alley behind. Stay there, don't move, don't talk to anyone, don't touch anything else. I'm coming. The line went dead. 15 minutes later, 3 black vehicles pulled into the narrow alley with military precision. Ryujin emerged from the middle car, flanked by men whose presence made Talia's survival instincts scream warnings. They moved like predators, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. But when Ryujin reached her, his touch was gentle as he took the envelope from her trembling hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his fingers briefly checking her pulse at her wrist. "No, I'm just—" She gestured helplessly at the organized chaos around them. "What is this? Who are these people?" Ryujin's jaw tightened as he flipped through the photographs. His men formed a protective perimeter, their communication conducted in rapid Korean that excluded her completely. "This is my fault," he said finally, his voice rough with something that might have been guilt. "I should have been more careful." "Careful about what?" Talia's patience finally snapped. "I've been patient. I've played along with the mystery, but I need answers. Now." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant he made his decision. "Not here." He gestured toward his car. "Somewhere safe." The safe place turned out to be a penthouse apartment in one of Seoul's most exclusive buildings. The elevator required a key card and biometric scan. Armed security nodded respectfully as they passed. The apartment itself was a study in controlled luxury, expensive but not ostentatious, comfortable but ready to be abandoned at a moment's notice. "Sit," Ryujin said, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. "Please." Talia remained standing. "Talk." He drained half the glass before setting it down with deliberate precision. "I run an organization. We handle sensitive business transactions, import, export, financial services for clients who value discretion." "That's a very polite way of saying something, isn't it?" "Yes." His honesty was somehow more unsettling than a lie would have been. "The people in those photographs," he continued, "they represent a competing organization, one that's been trying to expand into our territory for months. And I got caught in the middle because I bought you coffee. You got caught in the middle because they think you matter to me." He met her eyes directly. "They're not wrong." The admission hit her like a physical blow. Talia sank into the nearest chair, her mind racing through implications she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. "What does that mean for me?" "It means I protect you." His voice carried absolute certainty, "Whatever it takes." "And if I don't want your protection?" "Then you'll die." The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Ryujin didn't apologize for his directness, didn't soften the harsh reality with comforting lies. "How long?" Talia asked quietly. "How long what? How long have you been in this business?" "My entire life." He moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. "My father built this organization, his father before him. It's not a career choice, it's a birthright." "And you never wanted anything else?" His laugh was bitter. "What I wanted stopped mattering a long time ago." Talia studied his profile, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and relaxed at his sides. For all his power and control, Ryujin looked profoundly lonely. "The coffee," she said suddenly. "That first day. You really did forget your wallet, didn't you?" He turned, surprise flickering across his features. "Yes. So it was just chance. Random kindness to a stranger." "Nothing in my life is random, Talia. Except you." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You were the first person in 20 years to do something for me, without wanting anything in return. Do you understand what that means to someone like me?" She did understand, and it terrified her. Because looking at him now, this dangerous, powerful man who commanded fear and respect with equal ease, she saw something that called to every protective instinct she possessed. "Ryujin," she said carefully, "what happens now?" "Now," he said, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek with surprising gentleness, "I keep you safe. And you decide if you can live with what that means." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The tenderness in his expression vanished, replaced by the cold calculation she was beginning to recognize as his professional mask. "They know you have the photographs," he said, reading the text. "We need to move now." The safe house was a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, the kind of place that would never attract attention. Ryujin's men had swept it for surveillance devices and established a security perimeter that was invisible but absolute. To any casual observer, Talia was simply a young woman staying with friends. The illusion of normalcy lasted exactly 36 hours. She was making coffee, a habit that had become almost meditative since meeting Ryujin, when she heard the first gunshot. The sound was muffled, distant, but unmistakable. Talia's training kicked in. Not formal training, but the survival instincts honed by years of navigating dangerous neighborhoods and unpredictable situations. She dropped to the floor, crawled to the window, and carefully peered through the blinds. 3 bodies lay motionless in the courtyard below, Ryujin's guards. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Come downstairs, alone, or we start killing civilians." Talia's hands shook as she typed back. "What do you want?" "You. 5 minutes." She could call Ryujin. Should call him. But the response time would be too long, and innocent people would die while she waited for rescue. The decision made itself. The stairwell was empty, eerily quiet after the violence that had erupted minutes earlier. Talia descended slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. On the ground floor, the building's elderly security guard sat zip-tied to his chair, alive but terrified. "Smart girl," a voice said behind her. Talia turned to find a man in his 50s, well-dressed but with eyes that held no warmth. 2 younger men flanked him, their hands resting casually on concealed weapons. "Mr. Park sends his regards," the older man continued in accented English. "He's very interested in meeting the woman who's captured Ryujin's attention. I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." His smile was predatory. "You're just an innocent waitress who happened to catch the eye of Seoul's most dangerous man. Pure coincidence." They moved her to a van with practiced efficiency. No unnecessary violence, no dramatic threats, just professional kidnapping executed with military precision. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Talia caught a glimpse of Ryujin's SUV turning the corner 3 blocks away. Too late. The warehouse they brought her to smelled of rust and abandonment. Industrial equipment covered in tarps created a maze of shadows and hiding places. They secured her to a chair in the center of the space, positioned so she could see every entrance. "He'll come for you," the older man said, checking his watch. "Ryujin doesn't abandon his investments. I'm not an investment." "No?" He tilted his head, studying her with clinical interest. "Then what are you?" Talia didn't answer, because she wasn't sure herself. What was she to Ryujin? A weakness to be exploited? A complication in his carefully ordered world? Or something more dangerous? Something that made a man who trusted no one willing to risk everything? The answer came 40 minutes later, in the form of controlled explosions that took out the building's power grid. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as armed figures moved through the shadows with lethal precision. The kidnappers' professional calm evaporated as they realized they weren't facing a rescue attempt, they were facing an execution. Ryujin appeared through the smoke like an avenging angel, his expensive suit replaced by tactical gear that transformed him from businessman to warrior. The dragon tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe in the flickering light as he moved with fluid, deadly grace. He didn't negotiate, didn't demand surrender. He simply eliminated threats with surgical efficiency until only silence remained. When he reached Talia, his hands were gentle as they freed her from the restraints, but his eyes held a darkness that made her shiver. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, strained. "No." She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Ryujin, I'm okay. They touched you." It wasn't a question. "They put their hands on you. I'm alive, that's what matters." But she could see it wasn't enough for him. The careful control that defined Ryujin had cracked, revealing something primal and possessive that should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she'd ever felt in her life. The ride back to his penthouse passed in tense silence. Ryujin's men handled the cleanup with practiced efficiency, while he sat beside her, his hand never leaving hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "This is my fault," he said finally as the elevator rose toward his apartment. "No, it's not. I brought you into this world. I made you a target." Talia turned to face him fully. "You didn't make me do anything. Every choice was mine. Even now, knowing what you know, seeing what you've seen, you'd still choose this?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications that would reshape both their lives. Talia thought about the violence she'd witnessed, the danger that would always lurk at the edges of Ryujin's world, the impossibility of any normal future. Then she thought about the gentleness in his touch, the vulnerability he showed only to her, the way he'd moved heaven and earth to bring her home safely. "Yes," she said simply. "I choose this. I choose you." Something broke in Ryujin's expression, relief and gratitude and something deeper that made her breath catch. When the elevator doors opened, he swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold like a bride. But as he set her down in the safety of his home, Talia saw the shadow that still haunted his eyes. The war wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The betrayal came from within. Talia discovered it by accident 3 days later, when she answered Ryujin's phone while he was in the shower. The caller spoke rapid Korean, but she caught enough English words to understand. Park's money, transfer complete. The girl was never supposed to survive. When Ryujin emerged, she was sitting on the edge of his bed, with the phone in her hands and tears streaming down her face. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. He went very still, water droplets from his hair catching the morning light. "Known what?" "That someone in your organization sold me out. That the kidnapping was an inside job." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Ryujin finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Since yesterday. And you didn't tell me. I was handling it. By lying to me." Talia stood, anger and hurt warring in her chest. "By keeping me in the dark while you decided my fate. By protecting you from information that could get you killed." "That's not your choice to make." The words exploded from her with surprising force. "I'm not some helpless victim you can lock away for safekeeping. I'm a partner in this, whether you like it or not." Ryujin's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the world you're asking to be part of." "Then explain it to me, all of it. No more half-truths, no more protection from reality. If I'm going to be with you, I need to know exactly what that means." For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then something shifted in his expression, resignation perhaps, or recognition that she was stronger than he'd given her credit for. "Sit down," he said. "This will take a while." The truth was worse than she'd imagined and somehow less frightening than the unknown had been. Ryujin's organization controlled shipping routes throughout Southeast Asia, laundered money for international clients, and maintained a careful balance of power with law enforcement through strategic corruption. They weren't the violent criminals portrayed in movies. They were businessmen who happened to operate outside legal boundaries. But the business was changing. Younger, more aggressive organizations were challenging the old order. Park's group represented a new breed of criminal enterprise, one that valued brutality over subtlety, expansion over stability. "The attack on you was meant to send a message," Ryujin explained, "that I'm weak. That sentiment makes me vulnerable." "Are they right?" He looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "About which part?" "Do I make you weak?" "Yes." The admission came without hesitation. "You make me want things I can't have. You make me question decisions that should be automatic. You make me..." He paused, searching for words. "You make me human again." Talia felt her heart break a little at the pain in his voice. "And that's a bad thing? In my world? It's fatal. Then maybe it's time to change your world." The suggestion hung between them like a challenge. Ryujin stared at her as if she'd proposed something impossible, which perhaps she had. "You don't just walk away from this life, Talia." "No," she agreed, "but you can choose how you live it." Before he could respond, his phone rang with the tone reserved for emergencies. The conversation was brief, conducted entirely in Korean, but Talia could read the tension in his posture. "Park's making his move, Aunt," he said after hanging up. "Tonight. He's calling a meeting of all the major families." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where he expects me to surrender territory or face war." Ryujin moved to his closet, pulling out a suit that looked like armor, the kind where showing weakness gets you killed. "Then don't show weakness." Talia stood, moving to help him with his tie. "Show them strength. Show them that you're not the same man you were before." "And what if I'm not strong enough?" She met his eyes in the mirror, her hands steady, despite the fear coursing through her. Then, we'll face whatever comes together. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a private dining room in one of Seoul's most exclusive hotels. Ryujin's men formed a discreet perimeter while he entered alone, as tradition demanded. Talia waited in the car, listening to updates through an earpiece that connected her to his security team. The conversation inside was conducted in Korean, but the tension was universal. Then the shooting started. The first shots came from the hotel's kitchen. Park's men positioned to eliminate Ryujin if negotiations failed, but they hadn't counted on Ryujin's preparation, or the loyalty of allies who'd grown tired of Park's aggressive expansion. The battle was brief, but decisive. When the smoke cleared, Park's organization lay in ruins, their leader dead by Ryujin's own hand. But victory came with a price. Ryujin emerged from the hotel with blood on his shirt and something broken in his eyes. He'd won the war, but at the cost of becoming the very thing he'd tried to avoid, a killer who chose violence over diplomacy. "It's over," he said, as he slid into the car beside her. "Is it?" He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. "Talia, I need you to understand something. What happened tonight. That's who I am. That's who I'll always be." "No," she said firmly. "That's what you did. It's not who you are. How can you be so sure?" She took his blood-stained hands in hers, holding them gently despite the violence they'd just committed. "Because the man who killed tonight did it to protect the people he loves. Because you're sitting here questioning your actions instead of celebrating your victory. Because you paid for a stranger's coffee and it changed both our lives." Tears she hadn't expected gathered in his eyes. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not," she said with a small smile, "but you have me anyway." 6 months later, they stood on the balcony of their new home, a house outside the city where the sounds of traffic couldn't reach them. Ryujin had restructured his organization, stepping back from day-to-day operations while maintaining enough influence to ensure their safety. It wasn't a perfect life. It would never be completely safe or entirely normal, but it was theirs. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his arms wrapped around her as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Which part?" "All of it. The coffee, the danger, choosing this life." Talia leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Never. Do you?" "Only that it took me so long to say the words." "What words?" He turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you, Talia, completely, irrevocably, forever." She smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "I love you too. Even when you're being dramatic." His laugh was rich and warm and entirely free of the shadows that had once haunted him. "Follow me," he said, echoing the words that had started their journey. "Anywhere," she replied. "Always." Years later, the Sunrise Cafe had been transformed into something extraordinary. Still small, still in the same neighborhood, but now it served artisanal coffee alongside traditional Korean dishes. The walls displayed local art, and the atmosphere buzzed with the energy of a community gathering place. Talia moved between tables with practiced grace, no longer just a waitress but the owner of Seoul's most beloved fusion cafe. She wore a simple black dress and comfortable shoes, her natural hair styled in elegant twists that caught the afternoon light. Behind the counter, Ryujin worked alongside her, his expensive suits replaced by casual clothes that made him look younger, more approachable. The dragon tattoo was still visible at his collar, but now it seemed less like a mark of danger and more like art. A young couple entered, clearly nervous about their first date. The woman fumbled for her wallet when their order arrived, her face flushing with embarrassment as she realized she'd forgotten it. Without hesitation, the man reached for his own wallet. "I've got it," he said gently. Talia and Ryujin exchanged a look across the cafe, remembering another nervous encounter, another moment of unexpected kindness that had changed everything. "Some stories," Talia murmured, refilling their coffee cups, "start with the smallest gestures." Ryujin smiled, his hand finding hers across the counter. And the best ones never really end. Outside, Seoul hummed with its eternal energy, a city of millions where strangers passed each other every day, most never knowing how a single moment of kindness might reshape their entire world. But inside the cafe, surrounded by the warmth of community and the certainty of love, Talia and Ryujin had found something rarer than safety or success. They'd found home. Thank you for staying until the end. Korean Mafia Lovers has countless more passionate and thrilling stories waiting for you. Subscribe to our channel to never miss the latest uploads. Your support helps us create even more incredible content for you.